Welcome to registering a domain name for your small business. I'm Richard Tucker from debaffle.net, and in this short course I'll take you through all the considerations that you need to know when you're first registering a domain name. Now I'm going to start off with what is a domain name, and then I'll go through the items that will be covered in this course. So let's get started. First up, these are all examples of domain names for websites with a domain name used on an email address. Now the parts in green are what you initially register, and the parts in black, well, they can all be added after your initial choice. And I'll go through those a little bit later during the course. Now what you're going to learn about the types of domains, selecting a domain name, the domain name resale market, how domain names work, selecting a domain registrar, and I'll give you some answers to a quiz. Now that quiz, here's the questions that I'll be asking. What's the difference between a domain registrar and a name server provider? Can you register this following domain? You can see great-name.com. Can I register a domain name of a competitor's company? Should I register a .com or a domain for my local country like .co.uk if you're in the United Kingdom? Why would I want to use a fancy domain name like .consulting? How do I register blog.mycompany.com? Who should I register my domain with? And then lastly, how much does a domain cost? So if you don't know the answers to any of these questions, well, you'll find them out during the next 30 minutes or so in this course. Types of domains. So the original generic top-level domains are well known to everyone: .com, .org, .net, .gov, .edu. Initially, .com was just for commercial, .org for non-profits, and .net for networks, but now these can be registered by anyone for any type of site. .gov is still government sites, and .edu is still educational organisations. Now the other type of top-level domains are considered relatively new, so .auto, .black, .car, you can see the list here, and the list just keeps expanding. A lot of these just aren't known by the general public. So while they can be quite cool, they can also be quite confusing if you're telling someone your website address. They might actually question if such an address can exist. And then the third type of top-level domain is a country code top-level domain, .au for Australia, for example, and the list is just huge. You can go to the Wikipedia site to see the full list. So one reason to use that is so that you appeal to your local audience. Your business might feel a bit more local if you're in Australia and if you've got a .com.au business. And Google will actually prioritize results for visitors coming from Australia. Searching in Google, it'll return results from Australian sites with everything else being equal compared to other sites outside of Australia. That said, there's some other reasons to use country code, and that is just to make some cool domain names. So bit.ly.com, also using the Libya domain.ly, can just be bit.ly. And bit.ly, if you're not familiar, it takes a long domain URL like this to a link, and then it shortens it. It just makes it easier to put into emails or to copy into posts on Facebook, etc. Google does a similar thing with .gl, and I plan to do something similar with a .al, debaffle, using .al from Albania. So there's some non-traditional uses of country code top-level domains. In terms of market share, .com by far leads with about 50% of all addresses on the web being a .com, and then you can see .net and .org quickly follow. Country codes, they also follow. Rarely their recognition is within the country. A slight exception with Russia, it seems to have a big association with spam sites. So while 5% of Russian sites, a lot of those are just spam sites. Now, if you're looking at subdomains in HTTPS, subdomain is anything to the left of the first dot if you have two dots. So subdomain.yourdomain.com. Yourdomain.com is the domain, and this bit here in bold is the subdomain. So you can see blog, www, eBay, using examples here. All these can be added after you initially register your domain. And indeed, no one can stop you doing anything for the subdomain. From a technical perspective, you can register anything. You might have some trademark issues, of course, but you can register whatever you want. Once you've got your domain, you can do anything for the subdomain using your administration tools for your domain at your website registrar. And then HTTP or HTTPS, if you're not familiar, the S gives you the secure symbol because it encrypts traffic from a website client to a web server. Well, HTTP or HTTPS, these are both unrelated to your domain choice. They're all about how a website gets set up. So in both these examples, you set these up after your initial domain choice, and your domain is the bit that isn't in bold on this page. Now, looking at price, price is annual, that's the first thing. .com is very cheap if your name is not taken. Here's an example, just $3 for the first year and then $15 for the subsequent years. Some domains cost more. Here's an example with .pr for Puerto Rico, popular with PR agencies, but at $1,400 a year, I guess you've got to really want that domain. And then you can also go to auction, and I guess the sky's the limit. Here's an example of wood.com for nearly 700,000 US dollars. I guess it depends what they get, but either way, you can see that price can vary tremendously. Selecting a domain name. So in terms of selecting a domain name, you can use any letter of the alphabet, any number 0 to 9. You can use hyphens, but not at the start or the end, and not a double hyphen. And domain names are not case sensitive and need 1 to 63 characters. That said, domain names with 1 and 2 characters have restrictions depending on the domain suffix .com or what have you, and they're pretty hard to get, extremely expensive as well. So in general, you're looking more than 1 or 2 characters, or indeed 3 or 4. So let's have a look at a few examples. 123domain.com, that works. Domain-123.com, that works. Looks like I've got a repeat here, that works. Domain-123.com, that works. And here we've got domain123.com with a capital D. Since domains aren't case sensitive, they're equivalent to each other without the capital D. This example does not work. It's got 2 hyphens. Can't have that. Can't have a hyphen at the beginning of a domain. You can't have a hyphen at the end. And you also can't have exclamation marks or any other strange characters, because we can only have letters of the alphabet, or 0s to 9. That said, I just said we can't have any strange characters. There is an international domain name method which allows you to use other alphabets other than the English alphabet. And here we've got Hausa, using a German A with an umlaut, and how that's achieved is actually by using a different set of code that uses the characters that are allowed. You can see the double hyphen is here, but that's how that's identified as a different set of code for the international domain names. And then it then allows your browser or your user to type into a browser these other characters that will convert it, and that'll then allow people to be none the wiser that they're actually not going to hauser.com, they're actually going to xn hyphen, and you can see the name here. But from the user experience, it allows them to use those non-English alphabets. Now, I'm not going to concentrate too much on that. If you are interested, have a look at the international domain names if your customers are using other language sets. In terms of selecting a domain name, it's probably a good idea to check if your name can be misread. So here we've got an example of expertsexchange.com. Well, that's not what the site is about. You can see the site here. This is a huge site which is actually expertsexchange.com, and after many years of being misread, they had to rename their site, or chose to rename their site, to expert-exchange.com. So if you're looking at your domain name, perhaps have a look and save some future heartache. Now, name generators can be quite helpful. This is a site, namemesh.com. Add in a couple of words that your site is about. So I might have a paint shop and I've got fast drying paint. It'll automatically generate some examples that I might want to consider. And you can see here, paint fast using a .st domain. There's other examples as well that you can see. The advantage of using these sites is it automatically puts into red anything that's already registered as it generates the name options, and puts into green that anything's that available. You can just help stimulate ideas if you're looking for ideas. Now, when you are selecting a domain name, a background check can be useful just in case the domain name has already been registered in the past, because it could have some bad history related to it. Isbanned.com lets you know if Google has ever banned the domain name. It's not insurmountable if it has been banned in the past. The reason could be due to having a spamming history, for example. You can also look at the domain that you're looking at registering at archive.org/web. And here's me looking at a domain that I registered, teamin.net, and I actually found that it used to be a guns club. You can just go back in time and see what used to be on the website. Now, that can be important because some of the big web content filtering companies that might be used by your ISP or your place of work, or indeed your target visitor's place of work, will actually filter out websites depending on the type of content they've got, and guns is one category that often gets filtered. You can visit this link here and see the types of categories that are filtered, things like pornography, gambling, and indeed gun sites get filtered, but you can see the list here. Now again, it's not insurmountable. If you register a domain and the site was previously used for content that would get filtered, you can contact the filter companies and get that recategorized. So it's just something forewarned is forearmed, I guess. Now, in terms of squatting and trademarks. So squatting is a term used where you register a domain name that might be directly linked to a public figure. So Donald Trump, for example, someone had registered a domain name that included Trump, and Donald was able to successfully argue that that was a form of squatting, cyber squatting on domain names that were uniquely his property due to his brand, and he was able to get those domain names handed over to him. So there is an act in the US, for example, to allow this to happen. So whether you do that on purpose or by mistake, your domain could be snapped away from you. In terms of trademarks, again, in terms of you might be doing this by just purely by bad luck. You infringe someone else's trademark, but that's why there's protections for trademarks, whether it's bad luck or not. If you register a domain, and here's an example of ebay623.net, well, those can be taken away from you as well using this uniform domain name dispute resolution. Now, this can actually work in your favor if someone else is doing the same to you using your company's name and trading off it. You can also get those domains taken away from those people and given to yourself. So here's, as I say, an example of eBay successfully doing that. So check out for potential squatting and trademark violations, because you could be doing it inadvertently. Search engine optimization. This is the term used to help visitors find your website when they use a search engine. Now, in terms of selecting a domain name, one way that search engine optimization comes into the decision process is you can have a domain name that has an exact match for the terms that your customers may well be putting into search engines. For example, buy widgets might be what a customer puts into a search engine. If you have buywidgets.com, you have an exact match domain, and that will help get you more traffic from search engines. Now, you can also have partial match domain, such as, again, buywidgets, where you have buywidgetshere.com or webuywidgets.com or buy-widgets.com. This will also help. The important point, I guess, as part of saying this, though, is it's less and less helpful, as you can see here over time. The amount of influence that having an exact or partial match domain to the keywords that your customers might putting into search engines is reducing. There's a great article here at moz.com that talks about the influence, and in short, they more or less say if you can have an exact or partial match domain and it doesn't and it's consistent with your branding, then great. But doing this as your strategy for getting traffic in itself isn't going to be a great strategy. Still, it's something to be aware of. So in terms of general advice in selecting a domain name, keep it short because it's easier for people to remember, easy to spell, avoids mistakes. Avoiding hyphens and numbers also make it easier for people to remember. Make it unique, again, easier to remember. So here's a few examples. Vet.com versus the veterinaryclinic.com. Clearly vet.com is easier to remember. I'm ignoring the fact that that domain would be extremely expensive. Vet.com versus veterinary.com. Again, while that's shorter, it's still not as easy to remember or easy to spell. Vet.com versus veterinary-clinic.com can just be a little bit hard to communicate to people where the hyphen is. Firstvet.com, avoid numbers because comparing that to firstvet.com, one, it looks a bit weird when you write it out. But then the second is you can say firstvet.com, all one word, versus firstvet.com. That's actually typed in as 1stvet.com. It's just an awkward conversation. Vet.com versus all creatures. All creatures is arguably more unique than vet.com and probably a lot cheaper. If it was available, it's actually taken. But hopefully these examples give a bit of a stimulate some thought on the benefits of that general advice. Domain name resale market. So if the domain that you want is already in use, there may be an opportunity to buy that domain if it's about to expire. Now to find out if it's about to expire, go to whois.net, type in the domain that you're interested in, and then you'll see the registry expiry date. Now if that date has recently expired, you need to do a double check with the registrar directly. So in this case, the registrar is GoDaddy. Go to the GoDaddy Whois record site and just Google in the registrar's name and then Whois. And then again, put in the domain name and you'll actually see if it has recently expired, if it's recently been renewed or not. There's a bit of a lag onto the whois.net site for recently expired domains. And in this case, you can see this domain had been renewed up to 2020. I'd actually done this search in late December, about a week after it expired. The registrar had updated their records, but it hadn't quite made it back into the whois.net database. But either way, this process will let you know if a domain is about to, has it recently expired or is about to expire. And if a domain has recently expired or is about to expire, you do have some options via auction houses to buy that domain. So there's a little bit of time to wait, and this diagram here, courtesy of the web link below the diagram, explains the process from when it expires to when it may go to auction. And you can see you add up all those days and we're looking at about 80 days, so it's not immediate. Then what happens is, depending on the domain registrar, it'll go to an auction house partner. Not all registrars have auction house partners, but most do. So if the name that you're after was registered with eNom, and you'll be able to tell that from the Whois record that we just went through, after about 80 days, it'll go to auction at Namejet. Go to the Namejet site, put in the domain that you're interested in, follow the instructions, and you can then line yourself up to bid for the domain that you're after at auction. Another option is you can just use the whois.net record, and if there's an email address attached to that record for the owner, you can just contact them directly and provide an unsolicited offer. Or if there isn't an email address with the Whois record, or if you're not comfortable in contacting someone directly, you can hire a broker. And when I say not comfortable, for reasons of anonymity, you may want to not reveal who you are. This is often important for companies that are trying to acquire names without revealing their any of their business plans. So you can also hire a broker. On the right here, I've shown Sedo.com. There's SEDO, Sedo.com. They provide a broker service, and it's from memory, it's less than $100, and that only gets charged if they're successful in getting a domain name for you. So how do domain names work? Now this isn't essential, but it does help in understanding why you register domain names and also what can go wrong with them. So the first thing is when you register a domain name, your domain registrar will publish a record to the global name servers. These global name servers, there's just 13 of these globally. So your domain registrar, for example, in this case, GoDaddy, for debaffle.net, my site, registers on the global name servers that the name server for debaffle.net is at godaddy.com. Now, why is this important? Well, this is important because when you put a website name into a web browser, your browser converts to something that a computer can understand, and that's an IP address. We'll see an example of that in a second, but it's name servers that make this happen. So let's see the example process. So I've got my computer and I have my internet service provider. They have something called a name server. And if I want to go to debaffle.net, my browser effectively says to my, or asks to my internet service provider's name server, where is debaffle.net? Because my computer doesn't know. That's just a word. It's not something the computer can understand in form of an IP address. Well, my ISP, if it doesn't know, it's going to go, where is debaffle.net, to one of these global name servers. The global name server, since it has a record that was registered earlier by my domain registrar, will come back and say, to know where debaffle.net is, ask GoDaddy. And then the ISP will go off to GoDaddy and say, where is debaffle.net? And the registrar will keep a local record of all its own records as to where the various records for a domain are, for example, where the websites are hosted, where the email is hosted, and it will return debaffle.net is at, and it will give an IP address. And you can see the IP address there is a set of numbers with dots. This is something a computer can understand. The ISP then returns that to your computer. So now the computer has the information it needs to be able to go to the location of a website. And in this case, I use Bluehosting for hosting. Now the website is resolved to the computer. So this is the process of getting from a domain name to an actual website. And this querying process is important because it illustrates why we actually have domain registrars and the role of name servers in converting our domain names into IP addresses. Now, these local name server functions that are inside of the domain registrar, sometimes these are delivered by other specialist companies. If you're working with an IT professional, they'll indicate if that's appropriate for your own company or not. Selecting a domain registrar. So this chart shows the global market share of domain registrars. As you can see, GoDaddy has a significant lead on everyone else with over 50 million registrations. The rest of the domain registrars globally, you can see the distribution here, are way below. Now, it is important to note that market share varies dramatically by region. So PDR has a significant market share in India. So while it's not significant globally, it is significant in India. Now, if you're considering registering a domain, using a registrar that has a large market share is often a proxy for the maturity of their processes. They've got often they've got better hours of support because they support more customers, so they can afford to do so. If you're interested in the, you can see the link down here for all the registrars and their the various market share statistics. In terms of selecting a domain registrar, here's my suggestions on a checklist to go through. First thing is to check that they actually offer your domain. So you can see here on the right, I have dbf.al, debaffle, which is my my URL shortener. This isn't actually available at GoDaddy. I could only get that at a different registrar because it's a little bit unusual. .al is from Albania, which leads to the next question: where is your registrar from? Make sure that your registrar covers your country in terms of, well, if you look at this, .al, I got that from Albania, the registrar is from Albania, and all my correspondence is Albanian. Again, a little bit unusual, but nothing worse than finding out that you're getting communications in a language that you can't understand if you can avoid it. In my case, I couldn't. So a quick check just to see where they're from. Do they provide business hour support in your region? While they might say that they do business hour support, especially for US-based companies, if you're not in the US, that could be a problem. If you're in the US, it's great. And you could even see that they provide 24/7 support. And per the last slide, companies like GoDaddy, who just have so many customers, do 24/7 support. A lot of companies also do 24/7 support, but it'll often just be for sales inquiries. It won't actually be for technical support. So just check that technical support is within the hours that you work. Now, this is actually a topic for another video, but don't register. This is my recommendation. Don't register your website hosting at the same company that you host your domain name. Now, there's some great reasons for this around disaster recovery, which I won't go through now, but you will get prompted as part of registering your domain. Would you like to also sign up for web hosting? So say no when you do that, and watch my other videos on building a website, and in particular disaster recovery for why. And then lastly, get a registrar with two-factor authentication. This just means when you log in to your administration console over the internet that lets you administer your domain name, it means that you'll have a second factor of authentication, such as a text message to your phone. That's the most common. Sometimes they'll give you a key fob. It's probably going to be a text message, and that just helps remove the chance that someone else guesses your password and logs in and hijacks your website, because they're also going to need your mobile phone to get the text message when you attempt to log in. And clearly that's only going to be available to you. Now, a couple of considerations when you are going through the registration process. First thing is it's very, very simple. It only takes a couple of minutes. You can see here I put in mynicedomain.com, a couple of pounds per year and less than £10 for year 2 onwards, and literally press select, and a few minutes later you'll have your domain. Like I said, you'll get prompted for a whole lot of other things: email, web hosting, the whole lot. My advice is to speed past those. Just get your domain registered, and then see my other videos about getting email hosting and also website hosting. So when you do this, a key question will be, how long do you want to register your domain for? That can be as little as a year, or often you get options for up to 10 years. Now that's purely personal choice. There was some theories in the search engine optimization space, so that's how search engines serve up results when someone's doing searching, that domains with longer registrations were more likely to appear at the top of the results. That could well be true, but it's not going to be a significant influence on search engines serving up your website when people are trying to search for it. So just register for a duration that makes sense to you. Now, you'll also get some privacy options when it says, do you want to have your registration private? What they're talking about here is when you go to whois.net and you do a lookup, and we went through this in some of the earlier videos in this course, what you'll find is if you don't go for the privacy options, your details will be publicly available. And you can see mine are. I don't have a problem with that. I'm a company director, and my details are in the public domain anyway. But if there's a reason why you want to keep them private, you can pick the privacy option. Now, the other thing that you might want to consider is buying other domain extensions, including regional variations. So, for example, if you've got mynicedomain.com, you might also want to get mynicedomain.org.net, .co.uk if you're in the UK, .com.au if you're in Australia. And this just avoids other companies registering those same domains, putting their websites on those domains, and causing brand confusion for your own business. Now, clearly it costs more because you're registering more domains, but then you also have some protection about having brand confusion. So again, that's purely your choice. Okay, so to finish up, we're going to have a quiz. And these are the same questions that I went through at the beginning of the course. But now we'll actually have the answers. So the first question was, what's the difference between a domain registrar and a name server provider? So the answer to that was, the registrar registers your domain name, and a name server provider lets that domain name be found on the internet. Now you don't need to worry about this too much because both functions will be provided by the company you register your domain name with. But this can be an important point when you're trying to scale your website and in particular start thinking about high availability so that your website is always available and online. But from day one, you don't really need to worry about this. Both functions will be automatically provided when you register your domain name. The second question, can you register the domain https www.great-name.com? First thing is, the HTTPS is determined during the website build process and is completely independent to the domain name registration process. And www is actually a subdomain and is completely independent of the domain registration process also. You can add in subdomains such as www or blog or anything else at any point after the initial registration. Now with that said, great-name.com, you can't register this because it has 2 hyphens and 2 hyphens are not allowed. Can I register a domain name of a competitor's company? Yes, you can, but you will be exposed to a trademark infringement ruling and you could well have your domain taken away from you, even if you unintentionally registered a domain that infringed on another company's trademark. Should I register a .com or a domain for my local country like .co.uk? Now this really depends on where your customer base is. If your customer base is in the UK, .co.uk can feel familiar. You can feel like more like a local business. But of course, if your customers are outside of the UK, having a .co.uk will feel a bit remote. Will feel like you're a company that is far away from your customers. Now, what you can do is register them all. Serve up .co.uk to your UK businesses, UK customers, .com.au for your Australian customers, and use .com for your global customers, or use .com. Oh, for God's sake. All right, so now to finish up, we're going to have a quiz. And these are the same questions that I asked at the beginning of the course, but now we're going to go through the answers. What's the difference between a domain registrar and a name server provider? Well, a registrar registers your domain name, and a name server provider lets that domain name be found on the internet. Now, both functions will be provided by the company you register your domain name with. So in a way, this is quite academic, but it can be important when you're scaling your website for high availability so that your website is always available. Sometimes these roles are split out. But in terms of registering a domain name for the first time, you don't need to worry about it. The domain registrar and the name service provider will be the same thing. Can you register the domain https www.great-name.com? Well, the HTTPS and the www, those parts of this name are completely independent to the domain registration process. The www is a subdomain, and you can change that at any point after initial registration. So you can put it in, you can take it out, you could put blog.great-name, but it's completely independent. Now, with that said, I've just sort of implied that great-name is okay. It's not. You can't register a domain with 2 hyphens. So this domain name would not be possible to register. Can I register a domain name of a competitor's company? Well, technically you can. but you'll be exposed to a trademark infringement ruling, and this extends beyond just registering domain names. In any point, if you're trying to inadvertently or on purpose pass off as or cause confusion on trademark with a competitor, you're going to have some sort of problem. So the best thing to do is to try and avoid it. Just check out the domains that already exist and see if there could be any confusion with trademarks, and try and avoid it. Should I register a .com or a domain for my local country like .co.uk? Well, it really depends on where your customer base is. If you've got a local business just serving a local customer base in a given country, the .co.uk for UK, for example, could be better. But if you have a global base, .com could well be better. And you can well do both using various techniques for websites. You could have a .co.uk that appears for customers coming from the UK, or .com.au for customers coming from Australia. And then you can use your .com for the US and any other country where you don't have a local domain name. Why would I want to use a fancy domain like .consulting? Really a personal choice. These are new domains, so it's a balance between being cool and being confusing. If you give someone your domain name such as mycompany.consulting, some people just won't recognize that as a domain name. They'll go, what about the .com? So it can be great, but it also can be confusing. So how do I register blog.mycompany.com? Well, we sort of touched on this in one of the earlier questions. Well, the first thing to do is to register mycompany.com, and then you can add blog at any time later. You might need some help to do that. If you're only doing it once, these things can take time compared to someone who does it all the time. But it's not a difficult process. And instead of blog, it could have been www, for example. Very last question. Who should I register my domain with? Now, I do have a checklist that I provided earlier, and I think that's the best thing to do, is just to review that checklist quickly. But if you want a speed answer, in my view, GoDaddy will be a good choice for most companies that are in the US, UK, or Australia. So if you've got a small business in any of those regions, you're looking to register a domain name, you probably won't go wrong with GoDaddy. It provides 24/7 support. There's two-factor authentication, all those good things. I don't make any money by recommending them, so please go ahead and use them if you need a quick answer. Otherwise, have a look at my requirements checklist for selecting a domain earlier in this course, and make your own choice. Now that concludes this course on selecting domain registrar. I hope you enjoyed it, and please go and have a look at the other courses that we run at debaffle.net. Thank you.